So I think teachers have to do that. They have to adapt, and that's an important aspect of what we do from economics side of the house, because economics is all about adapting to the environment.
What happens when students encounter economics for the first time? Too often, it's a collision with graphs, theories, and abstract concepts that feel disconnected from their daily lives. But what if economics could become the bridge that helps students engage in meaningful dialogue about the issues shaping their world? I'm Kobe Nelson, and welcome to the Teacher Sphere, where we amplify the voices of practicing educators. Today, I'm speaking with 3 economics teachers who've cracked the code on making their subject both engaging and relevant. They've discovered something powerful, that economics, when taught through a civil discourse lens, becomes a laboratory for the kind of thoughtful, nuanced conversations our students desperately need to practice. Today, I'm excited to have 3 fantastic educators with me: Joanne Cho, Michael Arjona, and Dr. Travis Towne. We're going to be talking today specifically about economics, and in particular, Sphere's real-world economics suite of materials. But before we get started, I would really like my conversation partners to introduce themselves. So, Joanne, will you start off? Will you tell us the grades that you are teaching and have taught, your years of experience, and the content area?
Sure. So I've been teaching 20 plus years. I teach mostly 10th grade and 12th grade. In addition to AP Economics, I teach AP Art History and AP World History as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Michael.
Sure. I just finished my 23rd year teaching. The grade levels I teach are 10th through 12th graders. I teach AP Microeconomics and AP Macroeconomics, along with an advanced topics and economics class that's post AP. And I teach that, but I'm also a school administrator. So I'm also the principal of our high school.
Wow, you do a lot. That's great. Thank you. Travis.
Yeah, I teach civic literacy and economics and personal finance. I'm in North Carolina at an early college. I teach primarily 10th grade. I've been teaching for 20 plus years. Took a little bit of a break to do military, and then came back into the classroom because I loved it. And I also teach some graduate level classes in personal finance, and just really enjoy the side of the house where we get to blend civics and economics together.
That's excellent. I mean, I'm just thrilled to have so much expertise here. I mean, it's like 60 years of experience between you all, a little bit more. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. The first question I would like to ask you is, what in particular drew you originally to Sphere's approach to teaching economics through a civil discourse lens? Why would you choose that?
I'm happy to start. I think I'm drawn to it because I've been participating in Sphere programming. Sphere came to our school to talk with us. We were implementing some civil discourse norms, and Sphere, that was my first interaction with Sphere. They came and did some work with our school. And then, really enjoyed attending a Sphere summit as well. And really that whole approach of seeing things through a civil discourse lens, I think, is really important for our students at this time. And it lends itself really well to economics because economics is so present in the current discussion in the news and discussion around politics and what the kids are hearing every day. So making sure that we're doing this work in a context of civil discourse, it just really seemed like an obvious sell to me. So the fact that there was some econ materials was really appealing.
Yeah, for me, kind of similar. I was attending the Sphere Summit twice, and then I was introduced to the economic materials, and I found that it was really engaging for the students. It kind of talked across party lines and stuff, so it was really good to implement in my econ classes, and also kind of provide an opportunity to teach civil discourse along with it.
I'll echo both Joanne and Michael with, Sphere Summit was my first foray into the Cato and the Sphere kind of family of civil discourse. And one of the beautiful things about what I get to do is I have the same students for my civics and then my economics. And so it's nice to be able to blend those two disciplines together, because it's kind of like the 6 degrees of separation. You can't get away from economics, and you're teaching anything content generated with civics, you're dealing with an economic approach as well. And so you can always talk about the politics, you can always talk about the discourse of it, but at the end of the day, the conversation must involve some type of economic principles. And so for our students to truly understand the world around them, not only politically or historically or otherwise, they have to have some bit of understanding of the economic principles that are underlying these decision factors. And so it's a joy to be able to integrate this material into the classroom as a, hey, remember when we talked about this? Well, here's the economic principle that they're also struggling with as well.
I really like how you're approaching the interdisciplinary aspect of economics and other content areas, because I think that many teachers actually struggle with the idea of economics itself. It seems too abstract, and sometimes, quite frankly, I think teachers can have difficulty engaging students in
Yeah,
economics. So
absolutely.
I'm wondering, with the specific sphere lessons or adaptations that you made, how do you make economics engaging, so that they can engage effectively with economic principles?
I'll go. So I have shown the lessons. It integrates videos and articles and sort of role playing and things like that, and that is very engaging for the students. We have a 70-minute block. So if I do the same thing for 70 minutes, it becomes kind of, it drags. But because it has different aspects of it, it's been very dynamic.
And these are the real world economic lessons, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I'll echo that as well. The fun of these in engaging the students is, it allows the teacher to be a little bit more versatile in bringing their own experiences, their own knowledge into the classroom. And of course, they're involving their students who they know, and they're getting them to work. So, for example, I sit here and read the regulations, the good, bad, and the ugly. And I'm sitting here thinking about a wonderful, but my kids don't remember that anymore. But that is economics as a whole, is the good, the bad, and the ugly that we have to deal with. And I think when we as teachers bring those to the table and talk about from the civil discourse side of the house, economics, and this is regulations, and that's the beauty of looking at regulations and going, okay, are there important aspects of regulations that need to be addressed? And are there some hurts that are causing to our economy and businesses and individuals? And what is the ugly side of that? And I think we see on the news quite a bit that regulations can be both good and negative. And so we just bring that to the table of our students and actually let them decide. And I think that's how you get them engaged, is that you really let them have those ugly, difficult conversations in the classroom that says, well, I don't know. I think a different way, and that's supposed to happen. And unfortunately, they don't necessarily see it lived out around them right now. But that's part of our job as a teacher, is to invite them to have that engagement in the classroom environment where they see it lived out, they see it acted out, and then hopefully the goal is eventually be able to do that in real life environment as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of the same things. I mean, I think the variety of the use of, just like Joanne said, with the use of video, the use of articles, the fact that it mixes things up makes it engaging. And the other thing that I think the lessons do is they jump right into the applications. That from the beginning, whether it's the government failure, market failure, and they're talking about the the policy on cobras and how you can get weird incentives there. The comparative advantage lessons where they jump into talking about how trade impacts students' lives. I think with economics, you can get to application right away to where you're not loading it up first with the graphs and the dry part. You're starting with the application and then leading to curiosity about how these things work. So I'd agree with both what Joanne and Travis were saying on some of the ways that it's really easy to make this engaging from the beginning. And the real world economic lessons, I think, facilitate that with the way that they mix things up and jump in with applications right away.
That's fantastic. I'm it's good to hear that, and I can see from the way that you are talking about it how applicable these lessons can be to students' lives right now. And like you said, Travis, also provide opportunities for modeling, types of discourse that students may not be seeing necessarily around them on a regular basis. So, you know, to that end, I'm wondering how each of you modified lessons or adjusted activities to fit your students' needs.
I've had to kind of look at the vocabulary because it's kind of written for a higher level. So, kind of go over some vocabs that they might not understand. Since I have only 70 minutes and also we're prepping for the AP curriculum, I don't have too much time to go into like really nitty gritty detail. So, I've had to truncate the articles a little bit, summarize them, and do excerpts. But other than that, the way it's laid out is very user friendly. So I've really liked that format.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a lot of it is it's similarly teaching AP, where there is a real time crunch to get through the curriculum. Because the lessons are split into parts, it's very easy to say, oh, I'll take this article or this topic we've covered earlier, so I don't need to do that intro video, so we can jump right into this, or I can take these discussion questions or this particular article and then, truncate it or, in the same way. So I think because they're set up that way, it's been easy to sort of take a piece here, take a piece there, and then in other cases use more of the full lessons. Like I think like the national debt lesson, I use more of that full one, whereas maybe the one on comparative advantage or the one on price controls, I used pieces of it to supplement what I had already been doing.
Yeah, that's the same with me. I supplemented a lot of stuff. I think I use these lessons more as a jumping board to get into the area that I felt I needed to have. There are some things that maybe I felt was not necessarily over my students' head, but I couldn't get to because in the big scheme of things of the material, I just couldn't. So a lot of the stuff I did afterwards, or I would take and utilize at the end of the semester once we have done some things there. And quite honestly, and I'm not sure if we're going to talk about it today, but AI usage is an extremely important part, and at least in my opinion, of using these lessons to continue the real world applications, as Michael talked about, because then you start taking scenarios. Okay, ChatGPT, give me a scenario in which this comparative advantage would work over here or not over here. Tell me how this would work in this particular situation. And so I tried to incorporate a lot of that material to help my students understand an economic way of thinking and kind of merge that gap of knowledge and saying, okay, here's the knowledge, here's the application. Let's make sure we marry them well and that they put it on your level of understanding.
And so what I hear you saying, Travis, is that a challenging aspect was trying to make sure that it was at a level that students could access and understand and, be able to apply.
Yeah.
Um,
But
yeah,
that's the challenge of any teacher, right? That's the way that a teacher has to deal with their environment. Some you can call a class an honors or an AP or whatever, and you have some standards that have to be met. But then you adjust, and I'm sure Joanne and Michael are like this every time they have a class. Every class is different, and so you have to adjust to meet that need. Because if you don't, you're not going to reach those particular students in that class with what they need in that moment.
yeah, absolutely. Thinking about that, I'm wondering for each of you, what was the most challenging aspect of adapting these? So, what was the most challenging need, or what was the most pressing thing that you really needed to adapt these lessons to for your students?
I think it was for me the time to shrink down or truncate, like Joanne talked about. That was one of the challenges of these students. Are some of them even struggle with the understanding of the material or even comprehending what is being asked, and you don't have time necessarily to go into the background material, the history of that particular document, primary source or whatever. And so you just have to figure out, okay, what is the most important viable thing that these students need to actually read and understand. And that was probably my most challenging aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's the constraints that you're under with the AP curriculum and trying to fit it in, because there's a lot of these topics that I'd love to delve into more, and like, oh, let's spend some time really engaging with this additional article, this additional concept. And then I'm always balancing. I mean, but it's the constant balance of like, okay, well, I'm going to pay for this later because now I've spent 2 days talking about national debt, and now, oh well, what am I going to have to cut later? But one of the things I will, I mean, I think add to it, it's not as much on the challenge side, which is, we've talked about how we've had to sort of, adapt the articles or cut down. One of the things I appreciate that about these lessons, teaching it from the AP perspective, is that there are sometimes where what I'm really looking for are some things to really push my kids. Some of the kids that really understand the concepts well, so some of the more advanced stuff, and it's always easier to take some of the advanced stuff and then, okay, now I'm going to pull this from it, or I'm going to only use this part of it. And it's always easier to come back from that. And the fact that some of these lessons have some articles that are, written by Cato scholars that are really pushing things, I appreciate, because it's always easier to pull back. It's harder to find things that are going to push the level. So that's one of the things that's been really useful about them.
That's a really great point. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt that the lessons are very robust, and there are lots of different examples. I had trouble maybe picking the ones that were the most essential for teaching the lesson. There are all these other options like extensions and stuff like that. So for others who have more time, I think it's great that there are possibilities to kind of expand on that.
And I'll be honest, I use some of the extensions more than the main lesson because I found them more apropos to my classroom environment. So I actually said I'm going to use that and trade it out with one of the other key components of the lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. Those lessons are adaptable in that way. And it sounds like each of you are able to take what you need from it in order to meet the needs of your students, which is, exactly what we are hoping for at Sphere, for sure. Travis, I want to go back to talking a little bit about the civil discourse component. You brought up, the idea of bringing difficult conversations into the classroom and how economics is actually a really important vehicle for that to happen. I'm wondering, with regards to civil discourse and, viewpoint diversity, how does incorporating viewpoint diversity affect students' abilities to analyze some of the economic policies and principles that you discuss in your class?
Wow, that's tough because you're asking students to really delve into the deeper part of the Bloom's taxonomy of learning and really get beyond the rhetoric that they hear. And that is, I think, one of the challenges that we all face, but especially I think in current generations, we've got so much rhetoric that's out there that, he said this and she said that, and the media is saying this, and then being able to say, okay, so let's take away the noise of that and let's figure out what the economic principle is, what the economic the background of this particular topic is, and why is it important. And so when we get into the nuts and bolts of civil discourse about a particular topic, you kind of as a teacher feel when something is almost gets a hot button, and you wouldn't think it's sometimes the big issues don't really impact the students. It's the issue of, oh no, the vending machine just raised the price by 25 cents and I'm about to go and push it down the stairs. And it's like, guys, let's talk about this. What about the businesses that are involved in this price, increase? Is it price gouging because they're at a school and now they get to raise the prices on you? And so now it's a matter of finding the things the kids are passionate about and then say, okay, how do we engage with the principles that are at place? We can do this with our student government association. Why can't we have more events? Well, because it costs to have those. And why can't, do you want to pay for those? And how do we? Well, we pay a certain fee at the beginning of the year. Well, what does that fee actually go to? So you're finding the things that interest the students that they want to discuss. And then, for example, like the lesson that I kind of, one of my favorites is the meaning of cost varies when you ask different people. The value of something is quite often different, which is where you get into this discussion of, but why is it different? Why is the value different to you? And that's where one of the things last year when I went to Sphere, and we talked about the Mercatus Institute and the paddles, and I actually use those in my class because sometimes the kids don't necessarily understand why they feel a certain way, and when they hear why somebody else feels a certain way, or then they go, well, why do you feel that way? And then they're trying to explain why that person, that's the whole point, is that they don't just explain why they feel they have a red card or blue or whatever, is that they why does Kobe feel different than me? And let me put myself in their shoes, of their experiences, their understanding of their environment, and why they might feel a certain way. And then that's where the discourse happens. And I think too often we have these keyboard warriors in the social media side of the house that they just want to spout out what they think, but they don't know the full story, or they don't even want to care about the full behind the scenes. And that's what I challenge my students to do. So that's the greatest thing about civil discourse used with economics is, okay, why is that piece of candy or that thing in the vending machine now 25 cents higher? Is it because they just want to rob you? Or is it because they're trying to stay in business, and if they don't have that, then they're taking it out? Just a little quick side note: we had a issue last year with our school that there was a button that you could push, and you could get a free candy or a free thing, and so they just kept doing it, and so they would get an extra. Every time they put in something, they could get an extra one, and so eventually they took out the vending machine. So something that they were doing it for themselves, not thinking of the consequences, now it ruined it for everybody. And it was a big discussion topic at our school. I mean, they had ode to the vending machine, and they went all out for this thing. But I was like, guys, it's economics. They can't stay in business if you keep stealing their stuff.
I like how the lessons focus on the actual problem, like for instance, like licenses, and it gives examples of how that hinders a lot of entrepreneurs who want to get into the hair business, or manure business, or whatever it is. And so the kids are focused on the issue and not like, is this a left issue? Is this a right issue? They're not thinking about that. So they can talk to each other. A lot of kids come with preconceived notions of certain things because of their parents or the news or whatever. But when we start with a purely kind of economic, puzzle, the kids kind of can talk across the right and the left, and I think it's like a natural, civil discourse that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo much of what Travis and Joanne have said, and one of the things I appreciate or a technique that they use in lessons, which I think facilitates civil discourse, is the fact that a lot of them it's not set up as a binary. It's not like two sides. It's not a debate over this. Is this good? Is this bad? It's more about like just understanding different circumstances, like understanding what are the different solutions, what are the circumstances under which this could be good, under what circumstances could this be bad. I think about the lesson on the national debt, where it's just talking about here are a variety of different solutions for the national debt. Which one of these is appealing? So you're not debating against one other person, pitting someone against each other, because most issues are not like that. You need to see the nuance in it. And there's not just two sides, there's multiple sides to be considered. And then I would totally echo what Travis is saying about the value, and just most of it is just helping the students understand the other perspectives. I always think in teaching economics, the value in understanding the economic perspective is not like the rationality assumption. It's not so that kids understand that they're rational. It's that they assume that other people are rational. It's like if you think someone's argument or is ridiculous, you probably just don't understand their argument well enough. And so if the goal is using these economic tools to understand why people think these things or what the argument is for their policy, then that helps it not pit people against each other. It just helps. It's more about just getting closer to understanding what those other perspectives are.
Right, absolutely. The idea of nuance is so important across multiple disciplines, but absolutely, I hear you say that in economics, it's particularly important to understand nuances and then also be able to articulate that, which can be challenging for students at many levels. But before even getting to articulating that, you all were talking about, getting students to understand that there are multiple perspectives. And Travis, you mentioned a strategy in particular from the Mercatus Institute to help students be able to get at that, to consider multiple perspectives. And I'm wondering from each of you, what strategies were the most helpful to ensure that students considered multiple perspectives? So not necessarily the lessons, but particular teaching strategies that you used.
I think having the discussions after the lesson and kind of debriefing and kind of saying, like, what were your preconceived notions before you came to class, and then how did that change after class, and how did our discussion and what you heard from your peers really help you kind of broaden the way you thought about it?
Yeah, and I think for me, a lot of it is I don't do a lot of asking the students' opinions about issues before we've studied it, because I want them to not focus on what their preconceived notion is, but more of like, okay, now that you've, similar to what Joanne said, now that you've heard all of this, what are your thoughts? What do you understand about these? And again, not having them pick a side in the same way I model that myself. I don't share my opinions on these things. I say, like, here, we're studying these issues. Now, what would be the argument? When would this policy be effective? When would that policy be effective? And ground them in the economic tools, and resist the urge to ask the kid, okay, now what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? It's more about like, what do you understand? Why would someone support this? Why would someone support that? Because that's what we're really aiming for, as opposed to forcing them to pick a side, because many times it's just about increasing understanding.
Yeah, and for me, I do a combination of both because I use a technique and a tool called the questioning take five, or doesn't matter what the five or three or whatever. But I'll grab the little cones that you have for the soccer, the small little ones, and I'll grab some tennis balls. And so when the kids see that on their table, usually in groups or stuff, what I'll do is I'll throw up a question, and it will be a very open-ended question. And it will be typically before we've talked too much about a certain topic. And I want to get their first blush read on why they feel or what they think about something. And I agree with Joanne and Michael that there's definitely value in making sure that the material is brought to the table, and they're actually dealing with the the topic itself and not just the emotions. I think that's a big struggle. But so what I'll do is either they'll hold up the card or whatever, but then I'll have them do we'll take 10 minutes and I'll have them do a question you take two or whatever, depending on how many kids are in that group. And so that ball is the hot seat. And so that nobody else gets to talk except for the person that has the ball or that cone is in front of them. And everybody else is actually asking questions specific to what they just said. And so the power of that particular tool or that particular strategy, and again, we set this up where in my civics class, we actually have learned these processes. This is how I don't debate in my class. I have discussions in my class. And so the way that we've shown that is we practice. And, so for example, we talk about, what's your favorite, what's the best day of the week? And, of course, everybody's going to have a different best day or favorite day or whatever. And so we start out with a very bland, easy topic as far as the training of this. But the power of that is that the person that is actually talking gets to talk, because typically what happens is that, popcorning, everybody wants to have the say so. But when they start asking them, so somebody says, I feel that we shouldn't pay for this regulation. We shouldn't have this regulation because this is this. The other person is not just saying, well, I agree with you. I think this. Okay, so give me reasons why you feel that you wouldn't like this regulation. Could this also be this? And what typically happens is they start going, well, yeah, I guess so, but I feel this, this, and this. So it's the power of that is so much deeper of a perspective, because now when the next person starts talking, they go, well, I agree with Michael, but I also have a different view like Joanne does, and I'm trying to learn how to bridge them together. And then Michael starts asking me a question about how that starts working, and then that 2-minute, 3-minute window gets it gets longer, because you start to really get that discussion. And again, the power is cut it off. All right, you're done. And then everybody's seeing that, and from the teacher perspective, who is supposed to be talking in that moment. So as you're observing, if somebody is taking more time answering and instead of asking the questions, then you can kind of redirect and say, okay, who's in the hot seat? Who's supposed to be speaking here? And so that's one of the strategies and tools that I personally try to use.
I hear all of you, talking about really powerful ways that you are building discussion habits around economics, through different kinds of practice and reflection and whatnot. And it sounds very powerful for your students to be able to do that across the course of a whole year. And especially, like we talked about in a field like economics, where sometimes it can seem really abstract, but being able to ground your students in conversation, is a great way to get them to process and then also build those habits of civil discourse and keeping the conversation going, as I hear you speaking about, Travis. For each of you, I'm wondering, as you try to keep the conversation going and, foster those habits of civil discourse and viewpoint diversity, what are some specific challenges that you encountered, and how did you deal with them?
I can start. I think one of the challenges, and this is something I know from previous conversations that, Joanne and I have both shared with some of our students, is that sometimes the students can be a little too just accepting of whatever the teacher says or whatever the article says. They just say, okay, that sounds good. And it can be a challenge to sort of get them to actually engage at a level deep enough to disagree with it. So, they're like a little too agreeable sometimes, or non-confrontational. Like they don't really want to argue about it. They just want to say, okay, well, this is what the theory says. That sounds good to me. So I think sometimes in terms of how to deal with that challenge, a lot of times is I think pushing them with some of the questions. I think sometimes you can then introduce some materials that will, or articles or videos that then do sort of push them in a certain way. I think, one of the things I've noted in one of the lessons was sometimes when they're put off by it, by the tone of the video, like if someone is really overconfident in their point of view, that can get them to push back in a way. And I get not throwing any shade at John Stossel, but in John Stossel's videos that are featured in some of the real world economic stuff, he's very confident and sort of says like, look, my point of view should be pretty obvious. And the kids do react against that, which is actually a helpful foil for them, a helpful way for them to sort of say, hey, let me really question it. So I think that is a constant struggle with students, especially when you have it in things like some of the AP classes, and so it takes sort of deeper questions, keep pushing them to try to get them to say, okay, why would someone disagree with this though? What would be the other perspective?
For our class, we kind of set classroom norms at the beginning of the year. So, be respectful, like don't be a jerk, that kind of stuff. So I think we
I think that's a
modeled
good
that.
classroom norm.
What?
Don't be a jerk.
Don't be a jerk.
I
Yeah.
think that's a good classroom norm. Don't be a jerk.
I think everybody should kind of like remind themselves not to be a jerk. But I think the kids create this atmosphere, and once you establish it in the beginning, it kind of carries on. And maybe one student will say something kind of outrageous, and they'll try to like dismiss it or something. But the other kids will kind of chime in and say, no, let them speak and stuff like that. So I think just having good manners helps these discussions. And, that's how we're going to create great citizens by, kind of modeling the classroom and giving them practice.
And I'm not sure my struggle is going to be solved, because I think this is what all of us probably deal with on a daily basis when we're in the classroom, is apathy of the material, just because they're tired. They are in a situation where they're going to school maybe 7-8 hours a day. They've ridden on the bus for 2 hours in the morning. They're going to ride on the bus 2 hours at home. And not everybody, but these are the types of things, if you get a first hour class, you halfway get them awake. If you get a second hour class, they're right before lunch, and they're hungry. You get a third hour class, you're right after lunch, and they're just trying to wake them up. And then you get a fourth hour class, and they're just ready to go home. So the challenges are just like normal teacher stuff. And then of course the other side is that a lot of times you try to keep the talkers away from each other, because they gravitate towards each other, and then they disrupt the classroom, and then you're trying to, but those are your best students to have conversation and discourse. But now because of other classroom management procedures, you've had to sit them to the side. And so I think the challenge across the board that all of teachers face when we're talking about these, and we feel very passionate obviously about these topics, and about why these are valid, viable topics for life. And I think I'm a pretty big proponent of civic literacy and economics, personal finance being these topics that are much more beneficial to life skills than pretty much anything else. And so we have the passion as teachers, but when we don't see the students have that same passion, or later on they do, but then they always say, oh, I wish I would have learned that in school. Well, yeah, we do too. And what's the difference? But I think it is one of those things that we face as a challenge in our classrooms today, is how to engage those students, how to go through all the stuff that we don't have a lot of control over. How do we make sure that these students get what we feel they need, and they realize it? I think that's the challenge, is trying to help them realize, hey, you do need this. And when you realize this, we'll still be here. I think that's the challenge, is making sure that we've given them enough so that when they do run into the issues that they're going to face, we've built that relationship with them as teachers, as educators, that they're now coming back to Michael and Joanne and Travis and saying, boy, help me out. Help me understand this. You talked about it. I remember you talking about it, but I need a little bit more guidance. That's, in my opinion, the real goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes as teachers, we go back to the relationship thing, but there's a reason for it, right? There's a reason why we talk about relationships and how important they are. Because honestly, everybody learns at a different pace. And, there are times, like, I'll say this from an English teacher perspective. I used to tell my students there are times that, I will give you a book and it won't speak to you, but years down the road, it'll speak to you, right? And so, same thing, I think, with almost any content area. You just keep those lines of communication open so that, like you said, Travis, when they need to, they can come back and talk. As we close out, this has been a great discussion. First of all, thank you so much. But as we close out, I'm wondering, what advice would you give to teachers who want to make economics more engaging while developing students' civil discourse skills?
I'll start. Find the hot button topics that make that interest them. I think one of the struggles that I bring to the table is I think it's cool, but I'm old now, and I'm not as cool as I once was, or probably never was. The idea is we have to pivot. We have to be aware of what's in their world, and we have to make it make sense to them in their world. And so finding why TikTok makes economic sense or not make economic sense, finding why this particular place that they go to, why are they buying from Shine or Sheen or whatever it's called, or why are they doing, why is my 16-year-old daughter, spending the time doing this, that I find so wasteful. As when we're talking about economics and we're looking at the opportunity costs and the trade-offs, and I'm sitting there going, why are you choosing this over this? And she's like, I don't know, it's just more fun, or it's more this. And then you're having a conversation with a teenager that you're sitting there going, wow, it doesn't make sense to me, but apparently it makes sense to you. So let me hear why it's making sense. So I think teachers have to do that. They have to adapt, and that's an important aspect of what we do from economics side of the house, because economics is all about adapting to the environment. Right? I mean, that's the whole point of an economic way of thinking is, does this make sense? No, but this over here does. So I'm going to do this because of the economics of it.
I agree with Travis. I'm going to age myself by quoting from this movie, Sixth Sense. I see dead people. It's like, I see economics everywhere kind of thing. So I think, meeting them where they are, if they come in with a question, it's like, why do we do this? Why do I have to pay taxes? We have to kind of engage them where they are, instead of just like, oh, that's not part of the curriculum. We'll deal with that later. Just start with what they're curious about and encourage that kind of curiosity, and do simulations and games and, movie clips. I tell them in my econ class, we just watch movies, and they're like, no, we don't. I'm like, yeah, we kind of do. So kind of make it fun. If they're having fun, they're going to learn. So.
And I actually, sorry, Michael, I going off of Joanne, I actually tell them my goal, one of my stated goals in my class is to ruin every movie, every TV show, everything that they watch, because now they have to think about it from an economic perspective. And I have kids coming in and they literally said that they watched a movie last night with their mom, and then they asked the question, well, that doesn't make sense economically. And the mom looked over and like, who are you and what are you doing with my child? Because I tell them that my stated goal is to ruin everything for you, that you have to think about it economics. And Joanne, I love I see dead people. I see economics everywhere. I think it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I couldn't agree with what Travis and Joanne are saying more. And I mean, my approach is, I think if you approach economics telling them it's going to be dry and there's lots of graphs and things like that, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're not going to be excited. But if you show how excited you are, if same type of thing, if you just talk about how applicable this is going to be in all the different ways, and you lead with that excitement and ways of applying it, lead with the application, and then you can work in the graphs and you can work in the technical stuff on the back end. But then they'll go with you to that if they've seen, how this is going to apply. And I think taking the time, just like they've mentioned, to talk about things that are relevant in the world today, that talk about the things that are in the news, because when they see, like, wait a second, I'm a high school student, but I can understand these basic concepts and I can understand what they're talking about when they talk about the national debt, when they talk about tariffs, when they talk about all these things, and I'm hearing all this discussion, but I don't know quite what it is. And they see that they can get a window into that with pretty, not a whole lot of time. You can get a whole lot of understanding of to be able to join those conversations. The kids tend to respond really well. They're like, oh, wait, this is what they're talking about. And this is where I can now start to build my own opinions about it. You can get that payoff later. And I say that having mentioned earlier about the constraints you're under when you're teaching something like an AP, like, really, there will be time for that. But if you start really building that excitement and enthusiasm, you'll get the payoff later when you have to do some of the harder things.
Absolutely. I really love how you all are bringing to light the often invisible economic things that underpin our society, right? You are teaching students to see the invisible hands of economics, and that's fantastic. And next time I watch The Sixth Sense, Joanne, I'm gonna think about, I see economics everywhere.
See, we've ruined the movie for you already.
Sorry.
Right. Thank you all so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being a part of this episode. And thank you for all that you are doing to teach economics to so many students across the nation.
Thank you, Kobe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today's conversation reminds us that some of the most powerful learning happens when we make the invisible visible, helping students see the economic principles that govern everything from their daily choices to major policy decisions. Our guest showed us that this work isn't just about teaching content, it's about developing citizens who can engage thoughtfully across difference. The materials and approaches we discussed are available at sphere-ed.org, but the real toolkit is what Joanne, Travis, and Michael discussed: curiosity, adaptability, and a commitment to meeting students where they are. Thank you for spending this time with us exploring how economics education and civil discourse strengthen each other. Until we meet again, this is the Teacher Sphere, where every conversation is an opportunity to learn.